All right, welcome back. We're back. Welcome back to AM Live. But we're continuing with the conversation, clearly, as you had, even when we were on break. And there's a document here, a document that was compiled by the U.S. Congress, 2020, Mali, August 2020, Colonel, I think is how you pronounce it, Colonel Assimi Goita overthrew President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, who was re-elected to a second term in 2018. In 2021, Niger, March 2021, authorities reported an attempted coup amid opposition contestation of contestation of President Mohamed Bazoum's election victory. It has happened now, as of July this year. Chad, April 2021, a military council led by General Mahamat Idris Deby bypassed the constitutional line of succession after the battlefield death of Mahamat's father Idris Deby, in office since 1990. Mali, 2021, Colonel Goita overthrew civilian transitional leaders, proclaiming himself transition president. Guinea, September 2021, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya overthrew President Alpha Conde, who was re-elected to a third term in 2020. Sudan, October 2021, 2 years after agreeing to share power with civilians in the wake of a 2019 coup, security chief seized control from Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and dissolved the civilian-led transitional government. 2022, Burkina Faso, January 2022, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba overthrew President Roch Marc Christian Kabore, who was re-elected to a second term in 2020. Guinea-Bissau, February 2022, President Umaru Sissoko Embalo reported that he had survived a violent coup attempt. So this is just some of them. This was up to, I think, February of 2022. There have been more as we speak now. What do you make of the timing of it? Does it have anything to do with the timing of it? Because, as I said earlier, 2007 to 2018, relative stability. Is it therefore an economic issue, an insecurity issue, Dr. Mercy Kaburu?
So, thank you so much. When we talk about the coups in Sahel that have been, we call it the contagion, as we have put it, it's deeper. There's insurgency that we are talking about. There's the presence of France that probably people are not, maybe it's spoken, but needs to be looked into deeper than that. There's definitely economic crisis and issues. And we're moving towards what we are in now globally that we cannot ignore. And basically, if we are to look at what is really causing the cause, I think for me, I would look at it like giving that, like for the case of Mali, for the case of Gabon, for instance, I first of all want to look at it like, what time did it take place? Like the one for Gabon. It just took place immediately after an election.
Yes.
Meaning, this is a country that has lived in the space of a democracy, taken periodic elections throughout. And just when an election takes place, when the election body announces the winner, the incumbent as the winner, a coup takes place immediately. That in itself speaks at the trust that we have for a number of things. One is the electoral body. Do we trust it to give us valid, credible election process and results? It also points to, is it time that we started thinking, or these particular countries start thinking about term limit for the presidential space so that you are not there forever and you don't give people hope? So for me, some cases is more of we need change today, rather than basically, sometimes it can be a process. You know, if you've been under one regime, a dynasty, like for instance, the case of Gabon, you would want to have a change. And I can tell you, sometimes change is not exactly what you get, but the change that comes, does it? We have a change. Let's look forward for what that change will bring. And as we were discussing just during the break, what makes it go back again to another coup is because you don't get what you really expected to get. And I think that is where we have a kind of a conflicting expectation. What is and what you get. Sometimes it's about an individual. Yes, you get an individual as a new president, but by the end of the day, the regime continues. So the change that you really needed, the radical change that you were just about to experience, you thought you're just about to experience as a country, you don't get it. And that's why you'll realize that there's another coup, like the case of Mali. And I think now deeper than that, deeper than the inside, is also the external aspect of what is triggering the coups. They could be triggered externally because we have interest. We are living in a world where countries like Niger, which has a lot of uranium, we are talking about countries like Gabon, it's well rich in oil. These are countries that are endowed with resources. I mean, you cannot imagine and sit and imagine that no one is interested in these resources. There are countries that are so focused. We are talking about countries like France. And I was listening to another interview where a certain ambassador was talking about, no, we are not interested in the uranium in Gabon, in Niger. But in the actual sense, a state from an international relations perspective does not intervene or does not want to engage in a conflict in another state for no good reason. It's very clear, it's focused, it's about national interests. And once we serve our national interests, then we can start thinking if we really need to be there. So I think it's deeper than just looking at it like, you know, there's one coup here, tomorrow there's another coup. No, it's deeper. We need to look at it from within, and also we need to look at the external. So once we understand the international system and how it operates and how it penetrates, permeates within these particular countries in Africa, and how now the internal is able to integrate with that, it's a little bit complex. But that is if we really have to understand these coups. Yeah.
All right, complex, because like in Niger's situation, I was reading, and you know how we say all politics are local? And someone took the view that this is actually because Bazoum did not come from the majority ethnic community, but there were issues to do with France's presence, military presence in the country. They have, I think, a U.S. drone base there. So how do we, because it seems like, Dr. Susan Mwangi, there are many things which are tangled in there. First of all, what do you make of the response? ECOWAS, the African Union, threatened sanctions, but there are those who say you have been threatening us with sanctions since 2020. This is a bulldog that cannot bite.
Thank you. I think for me, in terms of how ECOWAS and the African Union in particular, or African nations, are reacting and responding to the coups that are emerging in both Niger and Gabon is interesting. Why? Because these are brothers. ECOWAS, African Union, all of us are brothers. And so the old Organization of African Unity, the OAU, had the principle of non-interference. But the new African Union actually says that you can intervene in a state if you feel that the activities in that state can actually affect the neighboring states. But be that as it were, ECOWAS is threatening Niger, is threatening Gabon, but it cannot do anything. Why? Because the funding of ECOWAS and the African Union comes from the big brothers. So how are we going to attack when our very own funding that we are going to use is coming from the people that are perpetuating or that are bringing about the coups in these two countries? So I look at it as a way of ECOWAS trying to back, but it cannot do anything. It cannot do much. Because what France in particular is waiting for is that it uses ECOWAS to do the groundwork militarily, then it can attack from the air. But if ECOWAS does not attack from the ground, because there is no international nation that will want to attack another nation that is outside of its own region, if it is not supported by the locals in that country. So if ECOWAS does not actually act in the two regions, and especially in Niger, where Bazoum has been perceived to be a stooge of the French country. If they don't attack, if ECOWAS does not attack, then there is no way France is going to do anything. Remember that Algeria has actually said that we are not going to allow you to use our airspace to attack. So it becomes very difficult if ECOWAS does not attack. But then, why, and for me, why it is becoming intricate and interesting is because the region of ECOWAS in itself, like we talked about the contagion, is very much aware that we may attack Niger, and then our own people attack us ourselves. Remember, ECOWAS is an amalgamation, is a group of African presidents from the West African region and to some extent CEMAC that have come together to form that region. So they are also worried in themselves. As you said, that these coups are contagious. So what if we attack and our own people attack us? What is going to happen? We are also going to be attacked. So there is that fear, and it's for that reason that it has become very difficult for the African Union and ECOWAS to attack. Currently, as we speak, ECOWAS is actually no longer talking about the sanctions. Slowly by slowly, it is changing because they gave them 1 week, they gave them 3 weeks. Now, nobody's talking about it. People are saying, let us negotiate. So when you begin the negotiation, therefore, ECOWAS does not have an opportunity because the presidents in ECOWAS in themselves are so scared that they don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. So for me, I would say ECOWAS is trying to back, but it's like that dog that barks from far. You have gone to buy milk, or you have gone to get milk from, you know, a household like we used to do when we were small girls. The dog is barking, then you go back. Then the dog also goes back. So I don't think so much coming out of the ECOWAS. The only thing they can do is now to negotiate and discuss on what is especially going to happen between Bazoum and Tiani to agree on a working relation, and how that is going to work out is something that we need to watch.
All right. Yesterday I came across this on Instagram. A lot of your problems come from not putting people in their place the first time they try you. So is it the same with ECOWAS, that they got it wrong the minute they allow, because I read out that chronology of events from 2020 yes. all the way to today. So has that in part contributed to the contagion that we're witnessing, the fact that there has been no real consequence from the international intervening? Yes, Dr. Mastaburi.
You see, we need to understand how states work. And whether they are in form of an organization or whether it is an individual, whether we are looking at it from a matratro, where we look at it like for ECOWAS, or even a state within ECOWAS like Nigeria, we need to appreciate that these states have relations. And as much as we want to act as ECOWAS, we need to appreciate these are individual states with national interests. So the question is, yes, we have the AU that is also supposed to be guiding us. But remember, as much as we want to send the peacekeepers and whatever, interventions and whatever, we need to appreciate one thing, that it is me as Gabon, it is me as Nigeria who is contributing the troops, right? So there's the question of what is my relationship with this other country? And when we are done with this, then what? And then remember, there's also, there are so many coups taking place. Does ECOWAS have the capacity to deal with all these coups the way they are taking place? It doesn't even give you time. Niger won within a month, within 3 weeks of time, Gabon has gone their way. Mali is in a crisis. Really, I think there is more. And it's also a financing issue. It's a financing. Who is financing? Who is supposed to finance this when all these countries are in a crisis? And yet they are members of ECOWAS. Are they supposed to be financing their own internal problems? Or are they supposed to be financing this institution called ECOWAS? So I think there is more. And then, like I was watching yesterday, as you have said, I mean, Guema was sworn in. So who is supposed to be negotiating here? He's already sworn in as a transitional president. What does that tell you? That that Bogo is out. Because if I've already been sworn in within the framework of the Constitution as a transitional president, what does that mean? We have accepted that the coup is successful. So from there, how do we then negotiate? How do we intervene? You understand? So I think there's the question of at what point do you intervene? Do you have the capacity to intervene? Do you have your interests that are at stake if you intervene? Is there a possibility that we are going to intervene in Gabon or Niger, and even before we finish, like it just happened, and I'm not saying that it will happen, Cameroon is in it, so what are we supposed to? So it's a little bit more. And have they failed? Mechanisms of intervention are many. Some of them are effective, some of them are not effective. So I think it's also the efficacy of the mechanisms that are being used. It's also a bigger question. So in other words, within the framework of international law, you can say that intervention is not just getting in and saying that you can do this way. Suppose we also attack. What happens that you have intervened in our internal matters and we are trying to manage it as best as we can? What happens? But definitely there's the simple one, that once you go through a coup, you're suspended from the membership of the AU. You know, but is it effective enough? Is my membership within the AU, my loss of that, my suspension from it, is it effective enough to make me rethink? That's another question.
I mean, this is such a complex issue. And what do you make of the global geopolitics? You know, does it come into play on the African stage? Because the Russian paramilitary came in, is it in Burkina Faso or in Mali?
Yes.
Yeah, and so to help fight insurgency. France in Niger is being, has been asked to leave their troops, to exit the country, the ambassador to leave the country. France says, you step on French foreign soil. In Niger, and it is a declaration of war. It seems like there's a lot of global geopolitics at play there, because even there's a popular clip that was shared, I think, about 9 months ago. The Italian Prime Minister accusing France of exploiting African countries and thereby fueling the migrant crisis. Tell us a little bit, Dr. Susan Mwangi, of the chessboard, the geopolitical chessboard at play.
Thank you, Olive. I'll just think back so that I can bring in the geopolitics. And you asked a question about ECOWAS and why you think, I mean, it came in, it has just been backing every day. The challenge for me is how ECOWAS is not willing or able to use diplomacy as opposed to sanctions. Because diplomacy, especially with your brothers and your sisters, works best because you can sit down on a table and say, oh, this is a problem that affects all of us and we need to think about it as Africans and then resolve it among ourselves. Now, because ECOWAS is not capable or willing to use diplomacy, then it becomes very difficult, because remember that ECOWAS, the big brother in ECOWAS is Nigeria. Tinubu himself has just been elected. And he hears every day that there is a coup in Niger, there is a coup in Gabon, and he's very worried. So he tries, but then it can't work. So for me, my advice or my feeling is that if ECOWAS uses diplomacy, it would go, especially the sort of diplomacy where they sit down and discuss, and because they don't have the financial might to be able to attack either Niger or Gabon or whichever country. But then, that said, I see the coups in two perspectives. One, there's the question of the youth bulge. These two countries, the two countries have a very young population. And because of this young population, these are people who are on the media every 24 hours. These are people that are unemployed. They may be literate, semi-literate, or whatever you will call it. So they have a lot of time to engage if they are called upon. And this is a population. When we were in secondary school, we used to say that copper is very malleable and ductile. It can be bent very easily. So I see this as a disenfranchised population that can be called like this, and then they will just get in. Number two, I see historical issues in terms of the colonial legacy and how colonialism continues to play out today, especially in all the African countries, both Francophone and Anglophone. But it is much more, especially in the Francophone countries. Why? The Francophone countries, none of the countries is allowed to train their military in their own countries. They have to go, the French have to come and train. Number two, their reserve bank is in Paris. What does that mean? That even if they are producing so much in terms of the resources that they have uranium, they have gold, they have all these natural resources, the money has to go first to France, and then an amount of money is levied on the resources of the Africans themselves. Then Africans are given loans using that very same money, and they're supposed to pay that money with a very big interest. So what happens is that you're left with a population on the ground that is very poor, yet they have a lot of resources, both natural, human, agricultural resources, but they cannot use them because they have France, for example, has to consent that this should be done. Why would that happen in a country that is sovereign, that has actually accepted that we have our independence? Of course, there are two countries in Africa that refuse to become independent, so they are still relying on the French. So how does that happen at this time of the year? So for me, I therefore see at play in terms of geopolitics, the Africans have found a new pole or a new ally that they are very happy about, that is Russia. Russia is having issues in their own side because of Russia-Ukraine. So what is happening is that now the African countries are very happy to associate with Russia. And that is why they had the Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. And in that summit, they were told that we are actually going to cancel all the debts that you have. So which African country is not having a debt? All of us are having debts, and if it's cancelled, why not? We have a new ally. We don't want to rely on the traditional financials of our activities. Therefore, for me, I see a war between NATO countries and Russia. And that, the playing field then becomes Africa. And because the African presidents, in fact, I see a Cold War kind of realignment or a repolarization where Russia is asserting itself. Fortunately or unfortunately, Russia is now with China. And so for that reason, therefore, you see on one side you have NATO, on the other side you see Russia and China. And so the geopolitics are playing out in Africa, and what the results of that are going to be, only time will tell for me. Only time will tell.
Dr. Mercy Kaburu, actually what Dr. Susan Mwangi is saying, I have heard that there was a similar scenario during the actual Cold War. Definitely. So how much of this is geopolitics at play?
It is, as we said, it is from within. It's also a very seriously geopolitical issue. In fact, I was reading that the U.S. did not define Niger's military
I saw the same thing as a coup. Yes.
And they said if it's not successful, you know, why? Why would a country like the U.S. fail to define what everybody else has defined as a coup, as a coup? So it tells you there's deeper. Niger is the biggest ally of the U.S. in the global war on terror within the Sahel. So what happens if I define this as a coup? It means within my framework, I need to pack my things and go, because I do not support unconstitutional takeover of government. So I must deal with my problem first. But as I said earlier, what is my interest? If I leave Niger because of my principles of democracy, I am basically opening Niger to Russia. So what do? I am in the middle of, we are still talking to Bazoum, we are still negotiating this. This is not a coup. This is, yet everybody has been able to watch, and everybody has defined it. And I think that also brings some level of tension between France and Washington. Why? Because they have already defined this is a coup. The US it's not. And purely it's because of this interest of how do we fight the Islamists? And we were using Niger. It was our biggest ally. What will happen if we say this is a coup? So you can see how the geopolitics is working. And, you know, we may ignore what is happening between Russia and Ukraine and say, oh, that is too far. No, it's here with us. It's like part of this whole thing. We may talk about the Wagner groups and assume that, you know, they're just here to deal with a few like Mali and Central African Republic. But if the U.S. withdrew today, because it has troops in Nigeria, if it withdrew its troops on the basis of we do not support a coup, it's unconstitutional, that is not a democracy, what have you just done? Russia takes over. So it's a little bit complex. And then you can see now France is being pushed out very strongly. In fact, there was a lot of demonstration, I think yesterday, that it's now time for France to pack and leave Niger, and they're very serious about it. There was a lot of demonstration around the whatever.
Apparently, whatever agreement they had reached has expired.
Exactly, it's done, and it's time for you to leave. And there's the question of when we leave, you know, because France believes, and definitely they have signed, they have agreed that when you attack this, we are in it. But we are in it for what? We are in it for what? So it is strongly about the geopolitics and what are my interests. And, you know, France has lost Mali. You know, it has lost Burkina Faso. And now for it to lose Niger, I mean, it's a little bit complicated. And so that's, I would imagine that France would want the U.S. to condemn and actually define Niger as this is a coup. But no, it's not, because what is it in it for me? So yes, it is strongly about geopolitics. And yes, it's played out so that you become proxy wars in Africa. But in the actual sense, Africa is just happening to be the theater where we are playing our muscle, you know, rather than the problem is African. It's a problem now becomes, and as somebody will say, in terms of conflict management, the moment new actors come in a conflict like that one, new interests come in. And once new interests come in, it becomes very complex. Because I come with my interest. The US is in, Russia is in, China is in, AU is in, ECOWAS is in. It becomes a little bit murky, very complicated. So yes, we have all these geopolitics, we have regional politics in, and we have the national politics in.
All right, and I'd like us to look at what that means for the civilian populations then, and what options. I know you talked about subtle diplomacy, Dr. Susan Mwangi, but something else you said comes to mind now, and the Financial Times published something 2 days ago, and it reads, not all coups in Africa are the same. The international community needs to recognize that both military takeovers and civilian misrule are wrong. And you had talked about not all coups have to do with the military. Yeah. In the case of Gabon, and this was published in the Standard yesterday, Gabon coup will not end rule by Bongo clan, presidential source. The military vowed to put an end to the Bongo regime when they seized power. A military takeover took place shortly after President Bongo had been declared the winner of a disputed election. Is the African Union partly to blame for the state of affairs? And I ask that because in cases such as Gabon's, where there has been dynastic rule, they are happy to host these leaders. They do not, you know, they remain mum on any allegations of electoral malpractice or the legitimacy of elections carried out in some of these countries. And yet in the case of Gabon, the internet was switched off. You know, the vote count was in dispute. Clearly there were elections. I mean, there were issues to do with this particular election, but they still opened their arms and welcome Bongo here into their fold. Is the African Union partly to blame for the state of affairs?
I think for me, it is not just the African Union. As we said earlier, this is so intricate, it is so complex. You cannot pinpoint at one specific actor in the whole theater of the upside, as it were. For me, I would say that the African Union in itself is a club of big boys in that context, in the African context. And therefore, majority of our presidents, our leaders, as it were, have their own challenges in their own countries. And therefore, it will be very difficult for me to point a finger at you when I have my own issues at home. So if you were voted in, it doesn't matter how you were voted in, as long as you're the president and we meet and discuss, that is fine. I wouldn't say the African Union is to blame solely. I would say that there are very many actors that are to blame in the emergence of the coups in Africa. But as I said before, we also need to reflect and ask ourselves, when you extend your term for life, or when you say that, you know, I'm going to change the constitution, and you're doing that to fit yourself, like especially in the case of Gabon, where Gabon, the old Gabon, had 54 children. So, and the population is only 2.5. So who is not a Gabon? I mean, who is not a Bongo in Gabon, in Gabon, actually? Because everybody at one level, I am a Gabon by relations in one way or the other, either by kith or kin. So for me, therefore, removing that familial, I would call it familial, because for me, I want to understand the concept of a dynasty as opposed to familial, because family is more of nepotism as opposed to the dynasty when you read international relations. And so for me, in terms of whether the African Union is to blame or not to blame, I would say the African Union leaders and other actors, the international community, and even the local populations in themselves are to blame for the coups that are going on. Of course, the internal affairs of Gabon played out very well, because you have a lot of resources, you have a lot of wealth, you have a lot of oil, but none of you benefit from that oil, because there is a family that has been there for, is it 56 years? For 56 years. And for 56 years, your family is, one is the president, the other one is the Pascaline, is actually was the Minister for Foreign Affairs at some point. And actually, for me, the Gabon coup is more interesting than any other. Yeah. Why? Because it is family that is very much involved. There are politics, that there are allegations that Pascaline was the favorite of the father, and she was actually supposed to become the heir apparent after the father had died. She didn't. Who got it? The new Bongo, Ali. Then the wife of the one has been deposed, says that her son was supposed to be a heir apparent also. Then the military leader, who was the aide to the president, who is also a Bongo, thought he would also become the president. So you see, as the more things change, for me, the more they remain the same. And for me, that is where the challenge is. So whether we want to say the African Union is to blame or it is not to blame, I think there are more complex issues that are at play that we need to unpackage to understand the coups that are going on. And who knows, maybe these coups actually are in my thinking. And when I'm thinking about it when I'm here, I'm telling myself, what if that these coups are actually perpetuated by the West for their own interest? Not in terms of what they want to see from out of Africa, but because they want us to forget the war in Ukraine. Who knows?
All right, so I'll give you occasion to respond, Dr. Mercy Kaburu, on the question of the AU sitting back and watching electoral injustice take root. And we'll also discuss again the issue of the civilian population.
Yeah.
Where does this then leave them? And what options then are on the table on the other side of this break?
Ndovu ni Coup.
Karibu Kenya, tuna tabia zetu tu. Basi weka mkono juu. Yes you.
Ndovu Coup hapa ndani ya Kwetu Mix Show.
It's a girl Javel. It's your boy Arabo. Hey yo, jina langu ni Savara from Sauti Sol, and you're watching Kwetu Mix on NTV. Keep it locked, usibanduke.
Pata taarifa teke na e-paper. Stay in the know on the go. Getting the full story bilangori. To sign up, choose your preferred subscription. Use the promo code SUBZ22 to get 20% off and pay. Get your favorite newspaper and enjoy the truth anywhere, anytime. For inquiries, email epaper@ke.nationmedia.com or call 0790 111 111. Subscribe today and get your taarifa teke.
Own your dream home for as low as 1.98 million Kenya shillings in Vipingo Kilifi. SMS Vipingo to 22365 or call us today on 0740 400 215. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, that image coming out of the Kenyatta International Convention Center where the Africa Climate Summit is happening. We continue to keep an eye on the events there. With me in the studio, we have Dr. Mercy Kaburu, Assistant Professor, International Relations, USIU. We have lecturer researcher, Dr. Susan Mwangi in the area of security and governance, Kenyatta University. Ladies, again, thank you very much for being here. But Dr. Kaburu, there was a question of just before we took the break, I asked,
yep, what about
the AU sitting back and saying nothing in cases of suspected electoral injustice, and then now coming up to condemn coups?
Thank you, Olive. I think I need first of all to refer to this particular civilian, particularly called the people of Gabon. They're called Gabonese, I think. There's Afrobarometer is a research institute. It is a research network. It carries out research based on public opinion in Africa, and particularly relating to democracy, relating to the question of coups, relating to the question of governance. And this is the most interesting thing. They have carried out a number of rounds in Gabon, and I wanted us to take that so that we understand that when they carried out the first survey in Gabon, when Ali Bongo was the president, because he has been the president since 2009, I want you to see how it has changed. In 2014, they did a survey there. And the survey, the question that we are discussing is, to what extent do you believe that the country is moving towards the right direction, according to the governance and everything? And the most interesting thing, in 2014, 64% of Gabonese said no, we are not moving towards the right direction. But what changed is in 2017, from 64 to 87%, they said we are not moving towards the right direction. That was in 2018. In 2021, the same question was asked. 89.4 said we are not moving towards the right direction. In 2021 to 2023, 90% said the country is not moving towards the right direction. So if you look at it, you can see clearly the masses, the people, had lost trust in the government. They were at the edge. And do you remember, Bongo got a stroke, Alimogo, in 2018, and there was an attempted coup. So what does that tell you? That this is not something that people woke up to just like that. It's like change was, we couldn't avoid change in Gabon. Because clearly 90% when they say the country is moving towards the wrong direction, that explains one thing, why there was jubilation when the coup took place. That could explain, that could be just one of the factors that really made people feel good. But at the same time, there's another question. what about these presidential limits? And according to the people from Gabon, this is what they said when they were asked about, would they prefer presidential limits, you know, like 2 terms? 90% of them, 94% of term limit, meaning this is a community that is tired. And you know, when you can't see a future, when you can't see hope, you know, when you have a presidential limit, when you know you'll be here for 10 years. So there is hope that after 10 years, change will come. And you know, change is everything that people need. So when change did not, I mean, when you're told you'll be president forever, like his father was, then it means a military coup becomes our savior. Because then if the constitution is not our savior, if we don't have hope there, then we need to get hope somewhere. And then hope becomes the military coup. And that could explain, one, the jubilation, but also the jubilation could have been explained by this high population of young people, that they do not have jobs, they're in this country, there's one family that is in power, so it's time for change. But as you have said, the more things look like they're changing, the more they are likely to remain, because we are just getting into another bogo. And I think the question of African Union, I think my colleague here, Dr. Mwangi, has explained. The question of African Union, even when they send people out there, like it happened in Nigeria, the question of observer missions in elections, you can literally see how people complained about what happened in Nigeria. But you see, this was a mission that was sent by the African Union. They have confirmed that it is okay. So we have seen where literally democracy has been threatened completely. And the people, and the African Union is at watch. You know, and we, as Susan, as Mwangi said, you know, when you say there's a coup, sometimes even the coup is not necessarily the military. It's a constitutional coup, and it happens. And that's why we have been having so many post-election violence in Africa. So if African Union will really respond to the coups, you'll have to ask a number of questions. And the question is, what is in my house before I go out there to claim that there's a problem?
They say those who live in glass houses should not throw stones. And it's interesting that both you ladies have said that the more things change, the more they remain the same. This particular BBC report on the situation in Gabon quotes that states that the military takeover in Gabon will merely lead to a continuation of rule of the Bongo clan, which has been in power for 55 years. A source close to the deposed president has told the BBC. General Brice Oligun Nguema is a direct product of the Bongo clan, said the source, who wanted to remain anonymous for security reasons. He warned those celebrating the coup not to expect too much change. The military vowed to put an end to the Bongo regime when they seized power. Now, on the question of where does this leave the civilian population, one would imagine after a coup, in the shortest time possible, there would be a transition back to civilian rule. When we looked at the list of countries that have undergone coups from 2020, the 13, all the way, although some were not successful, but from 2020 till now, have we seen a transition back to a case of a transition back to civilian rule?
Only first ask yourself, who is the African Union? Who is the African Union? For me, the African Union is that Ali Bongo himself. He was a member of the African Union. They are all members of the African Union. So as I said, it's a big brother club. So there's no way I'm going to attack Mercy when I know tomorrow it's going to be me. So as much as the African Union would be willing to attack, or would be willing even to talk, I ask the question, who finances, who funds them? Then the question becomes even more complicated. But then, I always say, if I was in a class teaching, I would ask the question differently. I would ask my students, why are military rules bad? Why? What if you get a military, leader who becomes actually the democracy that the civilians were looking for? It doesn't have to be a civilian. You can actually have, and I'll give you examples, and I'm not going to say that they're the best of the people. Your neighbor here in Uganda, I'm not saying he's the best of the people. He was a military. The neighbor on this side, he was a military himself. Think about
Kagame.
Yes, they have all transformed themselves. They have morphed from being military to civilian. And so for me, how do you draw the line between a military leader and a civilian? The military himself, that officer in himself, is a family person, is a civilian, is everything. It's just the uniform and the training that makes the military. So if you have a military leader who transforms himself and is able to transform a nation into a democratic country, it doesn't matter whether he was a military or not. What civilians in Africa are looking for is a country where the respect for the rule of law is there, democratic ideals, transparent checks and balances in our elections, the cost of living is low, and so many other things. So for me, if we get a military leader who is able to bring an African form of democracy, because for me, I still insist it's not the Western kind of democracy, because the Western kind of democracy is also skewed into one direction. For me, it doesn't matter whether you are military or you are civilian or whoever you are, if you are able to bring about democracy, the ideals of democracy, that people accept, you have the capacity, you have the legitimacy, and you also have the acceptability from the people, and you're giving people what they need, then if you are able to transform yourself from a military leader into somebody who can bring about what the common person, the civilian, is looking for. The people in Niger, I'll give you a very interesting thing. I called my friend in Niger when you actually called me, and I asked him, Osman, kindly tell me what exactly is happening in Niger. And you know what he told me? He told me, you know, we have actually decided to change because we have realized that Bazoum is actually from Libya. A different perspective altogether. So I said, tell me exactly what is it that you're looking for as Nigerian. And he told me, for us as Nigerian, it doesn't matter who comes. The person who comes, as long as that person can be able to ensure that our youth get employed, our education system is working, our infrastructure, our amenities are working, then it doesn't matter. For us, we are looking for change. The question is, and I said, what kind of change are people going to get out of these military coups? Or, because you can even have a leader who is a civilian who is worse than a military. So I know that is very controversial, and that is why I have said, if I was in a class where there are groups, I can put people in groups and we can discuss and then come up with a conclusion, that is what I would do. Unfortunately, this is not a class. But I would still say, for me, the civilian, the critical mass in Africa is looking for good governance. And the ideals of good governance is where the rule of law is respected, people are having food on the table, the youth that are outside there unemployed and they can be used by anybody, the highest bidder, are having jobs. It doesn't matter how much, at least give them an opportunity to have jobs. But if we continue having a population that is disenfranchised, that will vote because they have been given money to be able to vote, then we haven't seen the end. It may be a military coup, it may be another kind of coup. Anything is possible in Africa. Yeah, and for me, the question is, Africans, who bewitched us? What happened to the African continent? What is it that we need to do? Why is it that even those military rulers that come, they promise us heaven, but once they are there, Mercy, I will surprise you. Now, as we speak, the Nigerians are very happy that Bazoum is under house arrest. The Gabonese are very happy that Ali Bongo is not there. So if you did the barometer, if you did, you know, a poll, the level of acceptance is at 90%. It will go down. Why? Because people get disillusioned with time. Because the change they expected actually does not come with the same military leaders that were looking for. So for me, we need to rethink whether the challenge is the military because somebody is a military leader, or because those very same people do not uphold the ideals of democracy.
A lot of issues come up. Dr. Mercy Kaburu, first of all, the classroom exercise aside, we'll come back to that. Has it is there a situation where it has ended up well for the civilian population? Because when I look at Libya, at where it is now, when I look at Sudan, the people in Sudan, people were celebrating. In Libya, the same thing immediately after. Look at Egypt, where it is now. Are there cases where you can say there was a coup and the civilian population ended up better off? Or are those instances of where the civilian population are better off?
Olive, let me tell you. As Dr. Mwangi here has said, you start with excitement. But we need to ask ourselves, when you're bringing change in a country, you need change of ideology. You know, it's not just you've just gotten into power and here we are. So in most cases, you realize that nothing, the ideology does not change, because even the people who are coming in power were part of the system. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's not even a military, you know, like what happened in Zimbabwe. You know, it's just here. And yesterday, I think Mnangagwa was inaugurated as the president. In your expectation, this is a person who was a deputy for many, many years with, I mean, what is his name? The late Mugabe.
Robert Mugabe.
So what would you expect? Because for me to come in and give a total overhaul, I must be thinking differently. I must be bringing in new ideas. But are you likely to see new ideas? In most cases, you don't see the new ideas. And if when the new ideas come, they are contrary to what the expectations of the civilians were. And that is why every minute we are talking about, it is started like we were just about to get there. And then all of a sudden, we get back. So for me, my understanding of democracy, it's not a straight line anyway. So there is always 3 steps forward, sometimes 2 steps backwards, sometimes even 5 steps forward, and sometimes even, you know, back to 0. It happens. We are not, are we an exemption in Kenya? No, we are not. When it comes to issues of democracy, and I will ignore even the question of whether it is a coup or not, it's just the same way you have expectations. You get in, and you are saying we need a change. Change today, and tomorrow will be a different thing. And whether we have gone through a coup or not, even us who have not gone through a coup, we can comfortably say this was our expectation. We are not there. All this is what we hoped for. And as she has said, it goes declining again. We start with very good, oh, we have changed, we are now there. And I will not forget the Kenya in 2002. I will never forget. We were at the top of heaven. We were the best. By 2005, God knows where we were when we went for the first referendum. You know where we went to. By 2007, we could no longer define what is democracy for us. You see, so even in the military, when the change comes, there is expectation. But then this change needs a total overhaul in terms of ideology. Remember, democracy is driven by institutions. If you do not have strong institutions, whether we go through military, whether we go through civilian coups or whatever the coup, it will not change. Because we need institutions to drive democracy. Like we need a very good electoral system. Will it change? Now that, like for instance, the case of Gabon, they have now said they are going to change the constitution. This president has been sworn in as a transitional president. He has said we are going to start reviewing the constitution. How long does it take? How long does it take to review a constitution? It may not take 1 year. It may not take 2 years. It can even take the way it did in Kenya. It can take 30 years. So in 30 years, I will still be on transition. Will it change anything? Not. So it's more complicated than we are looking at it like when we get in, change will come. Not necessarily so. But as she has said, sometimes we ask ourselves, what is happening in Sahel? Is it that we are using the military as a tool of change? Because it can be used as a tool of change. If nothing else can help us change, then we use the military as a tool of change. And then we put behind the military lies the geopolitics, lies the other factors. But actually, ultimately, what a civilian wants is what? When you ask a civilian what they want good schools, they want health care, they want jobs, they don't understand those dynamics up there. What they want is change at the lowest level. What I want to see somewhere that I can go to school, I can take my child to school, I can get a job, I can feed my family. Before now, politics basically become complex at the higher level. But the lower level, the civilian, what they want is something very different from what the top is actually sometimes looking for. Yeah.
So, Dr. Susan Mwangi, what I'm hearing from you, because, I mean, coups are not new to Africa, but there was a period of relative stability, like I mentioned earlier, the decade 2007 to 2018. Are you saying ultimately the driver of change will be the vision of the military leaders who have taken over in these countries? That they will have the interest of the civil, of the Mwananchi in
Far
mind?
from it, Olive. I think the drivers of change in Africa, and especially in areas where there's a lot of discontentment among the civilians, is institutions. Systemic, both systemic and systematic. It is not waking up and saying, no, now we want to change. Change takes time. And once we have given the change time systematically and also systemically, because as we have discussed, the systems must change, but it must be a systematic way. We look at things and we say that, because we cannot just say this is the specific thing that we need. We cannot, democracy is not something that you can hold. There's much, much more. It's a wide, when we did the Maslow's hierarchy of human wants, it's actually a triangle, as it were, where you have so many needs, but the fulfillment of those needs is very limited. So what do you do? For me, it is how we are able to craft our institutions through a lot of sensitization, through a lot of education, educating our people, civic education, and telling them change can come, but change has also to start with us. Such that if I am told that I am supposed to engage in an electoral process, let me not be paid to vote. It has to start with us as civilians also, so that we are not blaming just one level of leaders. What is our role as civilians ourselves in ensuring that this change comes? So for me, it is not the military, it is not the civilian, it is an amalgamation of so many issues that need to come at play. I don't approve of military coups because they have their repercussions. Whether they are bloodless, like the one that happened in Niger, and let me tell you, a bloodless coup is worse off than where there is blood. Because the bloodless has so many intricate, hidden issues that you cannot understand. So for me, there is so much that is needed in terms of our mindset, in terms of changing our ideologies, in terms of rethinking what is it as Africans that we need. What happened traditionally? I teach history, and I am a believer in indigenous knowledge systems. What worked in our indigenous systems that we are not able to do now? Let us even link the Sahel and Africa as a whole to the question of climate change. What happened traditionally that our environments were better? The chances of us going through drying rivers, food insecurity never existed. What happened then that we are not able to do today? Is it that there's a lot of external interference? Can we be able to live our own lives? Can we be able to make our own judgment of our issues? Can we be able to sit down and discuss, dialogue? You know, discuss and agree that this is working for us as Africans. And because this is what is working, this is what we are going to do. Unfortunately, there's always something that hovers around us because of the resources that we have. Whether it is in terms of the coup, whether it is in terms of the climate change, there's always something. There's a hidden hand that is always hovering around us. And unless we are able to disentangle ourselves from that hidden hand, we still have a long way to go, Olive. Yeah.
Is it evidence, in your view, Dr. Kaburu, as Dr. Mwangi has stated, of failed systems? These coups, are they evidence of failed systems?
It's significantly, yes. These failed systems. And how does a system fail? A system fails progressively. It's not an instant. Sometimes you don't even see when it is failing. But over a period of time, you realize that what was working is no longer working, just like climate change. It's so silent. Sometimes it's very silent. You know, like when you say corruption will kill the system. You know, you don't see it until it takes a long period of time. And when you could go to hospital and get medicine, all of a sudden you don't get it. And that is where the problem is. And this is what I'll tell you. In democracy, there is what we call separation of powers. A very clear kind of separation of powers. The parliament is autonomous, and it must enjoy its autonomy, the executive and the judiciary. Now, this is how easy it becomes to kill a system. When this institution, when they lose their autonomy, especially from the executive becomes everything. There's consolidation of power, centralization of power around the presidency. So even when you have sat down and gone through the process of elections and you have voted and you saw now like, you're so clear, we voted for so we are very clear they are going to change. You sit back as a citizen, and when you thought your member of parliament is going to argue against something that you know so well is actually at the core of your community, you realize that you voted for it. And then now you're left, you're delusioned as a citizen, because now you don't trust anybody. And then all of a sudden you realize the executive becomes very powerful. When there's autocracy like we and the one from Bongo and the other countries in Africa, many of them actually, for you to remain in power for so long, for you to change the constitution to remove the presidential limit, is basically telling you that you're in control. That person, the executive, is in control of the legislature, which is supposed to be autonomous. They are supposed to enjoy their freedom to make decisions. And that's how systems fail, when we don't have that clear separation of powers. When we know I can make a ruling as a judge free of any interference. I can vote, and I have the freedom to vote the way I think is right to vote. The moment that lacks, that is where we end up with a serious autocratic kind of a rule. And that is where now the system collapses. And that's where we end up with no institutions. That is where we end up with what we are saying, serious constitutional coups. That what will you do? Like, we will hold an election and we'll disconnect internet. What will you do? We will do it and we'll not allow any international observers. What will you do? We will do it and the electoral body will announce me as the leader. What will you do? The moment you get to that space, you realize that you need a total overhaul of the entire system. And that's where now we talk about strengthening institutions. And I can tell you, Olive, oh, it is a process. It is not a one-day event. It is not a one-year thing. Sometimes it takes an overhaul of the entire constitution. And even when the constitution is done, we still have to be very careful to guard the constitution. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves spiraling back to where we were. That's my thinking.
Dr. Susan Mwangi, in closing, if kama hii ni ukweli ni ugonjwa, contagious, basi dawa ni nini? Or is it like homa, unaambiwa it just has to clear your system?
Somebody actually said that the winds of change are hovering around the African continent, and therefore there's a revolution. So I always say it is a coup depending on who you ask. You know, if you ask a Nigerian, if you ask a Malian, if you ask a Gabonese, they will not tell you that perhaps it's a coup. It's like we discussed terrorism. I remember one time we were discussing terrorism and somebody said, who calls them terrorists? Do they call themselves terrorists? And that is where we begin to understand that to the people who are affected, for them, they are doing the right thing. To the people that are being ousted out of power, then it is a military coup. So when I saw Ali Bongo saying, make noise, make noise, make noise, I told myself, I wish the media can make noise about the need for safeguarding our institutions. Because for me, the fourth estate is very important. And it has played a very important role. In 1991, when we were fighting for multi-party democracy in Africa, the media was very instrumental. Religious institutions were very instrumental. The civil society were very instrumental. What happens today? All these become part of the system, and therefore there is nobody to speak for the civilian. So for me, dawa is not one. Because when you have, I don't want to use the word cancer. I want to use a disease that has eaten into your very core, your bones. So you cannot take Panadol and say, Panadol in menitibu. Utaacha kusikia uchungu kweli. But that is just it you have not dealt with. So for me, The Dawa is a mixture of many things. One, we need to change our institutions. And in changing our institutions, perhaps many of these African countries have the institutions. It is just that we need to build resilience for these institutions so that we can be able to bounce back even when there are challenges. We can be able to say no when we need to say no. Number two, we need to have a vibrant civil society. A civil society that is not uncivil. Because unfortunately, the civil society that we have in many African countries today is very uncivil because they are being funded by the West to do things in the African countries. So unfortunately, and sorry to say this, I listened to somebody who was discussing actually the coup in Gabon. And he said, when they come from the West to our countries, they are coming to give us aid. But in reality, they're actually coming to collect intelligence about us. So we need to have a strong civil society that is pro the African cause, not using the West or not being funded by the West. Because if you're funded by the West, then what happens? You will dance to their tune. Then number three, we need a very strong media. And for me, it is both the mainstream media, the social media. We need to make noise and tell our African leaders, hey, if you are an autocratic leader, time is up. And we need to remind them that term limits are important. You cannot become a president for life. Good things also have a timeline.
Okay.
I mean, you can have a good president, and I'm not going to mention any president. You can be a very good president in the beginning, but then even good things come to an end. Give somebody else an opportunity. And number four, and most importantly, we have the religious institutions that are a hamburger for helping us, helping the people inspire hope. Our people today have no hope. And unless the people of Gabon, the people of Niger, the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, I looked at Mali, where we have the youngest of the African president, Ibrahim Traore. And you know, when he was talking at the African summit, I looked at this young man and how he inspires hope to the younger generation. Maybe that is not even going to take to be there for so long. He might also decide to stay there forever. But can we have an institution that inspires hope to our people, especially our young generation, that have nothing to do, that have only their chains to lose? Frantz Fanon says in The Wretched of the Earth, he says that, you know, the poor people and the youth have nothing to lose but their chains. Because poverty in itself has chained them. So even if you take them to jail, you are actually unchaining them. So they are okay if you take them to jail. So for me, the medication is take antibiotics, take antifungal, take painkillers, take them, but take them in moderation. And ensure that as you're taking these dawas, you are doing it systematically and systemically so that we have strong institutions.
Your last word. Sorry, my director is in my ear like time.
Time.
Dr. Mercy Kaburu?
My last word I'll say, when it comes to the question of how do we stabilize Africa, we must understand how institutions work, and we must also go back and also understand our traditional institutions. Is it possible for us to use both what we have brought in and also our traditional institutions? Is it that are we looking for that kind of a hybrid so that we can be able to say, when we use this, we don't feel like it is so foreign, but we can be able to redefine our democracy in a manner that it responds to the needs of the people. I think that is what we are looking for, rather than, you know, stick in office and remain there because you've been elected, yet we know the elections were fraud. So for me, it's that deeper question need to be asked. Can we really be able to borrow in and come up with an hybrid kind of a situation so that everybody feels accommodated? It's about inclusivity at any given level of governance. And that's for me, with strong institutions, I think we can be able to stabilize Africa. And then definitely, we need also to have the external player take care of their problems. And here I'm talking about the relationship that France has established with the Francophone countries needs to be reviewed so that the people can enjoy their sovereign power. And that is very important for me.
All right.
Thank you.
So the conversation does not end here. I will ask them kindly to come back and continue to give us their insights. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond her control, Dr. Hannah Macharia was not able to join us this morning, but I do want to thank Dr. Susan Mwangi, who is not only a lecturer, she's a researcher in the area of security and governance. And I also want to thank you, Dr. Masi Kaburu, Assistant Professor, International Relations, USIU. Thank you, ladies. I've gotten a lot of feedback on the show, so it was well received. Coming up is Your World with Winnie Lubembe. And as I've kept saying this morning, we do keep an eye on the Africa Climate Summit happening at the Kenyatta International Convention Center. My name is Olive Burrows. Good morning.